He said it so calmly that for a second I thought I'd misheard him. We were standing in the sunroom, the one with the big bay windows and my wife's orchids leaning toward the light, when my son looked me in the eye and said, "You don't deserve this family." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. The words hung there like smoke that wouldn't clear. He didn't shout, didn't flinch, just folded his arms and waited, like a judge reading a sentence he'd rehearsed. The light caught on his wristwatch, the one I'd given him when he graduated law school, and for the first time, I noticed how different his voice had become. Less son, more stranger. It was a Sunday afternoon in Naples, Florida, late August, the kind of humid heat that makes the air shimmer over the pool tiles. I'd grilled salmon, set the table, even chilled a bottle of Chardonnay he liked. Emily, his wife, had been polite but distant all day, fussing with her phone while their two kids played upstairs. Something was off, and I'd felt it before he even opened his mouth. "Deserve this family?" I asked. My throat was dry, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He sighed, as if the conversation bored him. "Dad, you've made things complicated. The house, the accounts, the trust. You're holding on to everything like it's still 1995. It's time to move on." Move on. That phrase, as if 40 years of work, of scraped knuckles and mortgage statements and saved paychecks, were clutter he needed to tidy up. He glanced toward the patio, where his car keys sat on the counter beside a folder. The kind of manila folder lawyers use for deeds and contracts. My name was printed on the tab, Whitmore Thomas. I reached for it, but he slid it aside. "Not yet," he said. "You'll sign after dinner. It's just paperwork." I laughed, quietly, not from humor but from disbelief. "Paperwork for what?" He didn't answer. He just smiled, polite and condescending. "You'll see. It's for everyone's benefit. Everyone's. Meaning his. Meaning the family that apparently no longer included me." When Emily finally called the kids down for dinner, he straightened his shirt and put on that host's grin he uses when he wants people to think everything's fine. I watched him spoon mashed potatoes onto plates like nothing had happened. Like those 6 words hadn't just ended something sacred. After they left that night, I walked back into the sunroom. The orchids were still there, silent witnesses. On the floor, under the chair he'd been sitting in, lay a single sheet that had slipped from the folder. It was a summary page. Family Holdings Trust. Revision draft. Prepared August 17th. In the beneficiary list, my name was gone. That was the moment I understood what he meant by move on. I turned off the lights, sat down in the dark, and let the words replay until they stopped sounding like his voice and started sounding like my own heartbeat. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'd stop being the father who kept forgiving and start being the man who remembered. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, watching the digital clock blink through the hours, 1:04, 2:17, 3:52. Each number felt like a heartbeat I couldn't slow down. The sheet from his folder lay in front of me, creased at the corners, my name nowhere to be found. Outside, the Florida night buzzed with crickets and distant thunder. Inside, I could still hear his voice. "You don't deserve this family." Those 6 words did more damage than any storm could. By morning, the house was heavy with silence. The same walls that had once echoed with birthdays and laughter now felt foreign, hollow. I made coffee, poured it into my wife's old mug, the one that said "World's Best Mom," and sat down at the counter like it was a witness stand. The folder haunted me. Family Holdings Trust, Revision Draft. August 17th. I'd created the original trust 15 years ago after my wife passed. I wanted to make sure everything, the house, the lake property, the retirement portfolio, would pass smoothly to our children. It wasn't much by billionaire standards, but it was $4.6 million built brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, over 40 years of architecture contracts and small firm work. Every clause had my signature, every number my hand. Apparently, my son decided that wasn't efficient enough. At 9 a.m., I called my attorney, Mark Redfield, a man I'd known since we were both broke and drafting wills on folding tables. He picked up on the second ring. "Tom, what's wrong?" I told him everything. The dinner, the folder, the missing name. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "He can't revise your trust without your consent. Unless what? Unless he's been acting under a power of attorney you signed and forgot about." Forgotten. That word stung. I rummaged through my desk drawers until I found the folder labeled Legal and Estate. Inside were old tax forms, insurance renewals, and a copy of a document I barely remembered signing in 2021. Limited durable power of attorney for financial decisions. My son's name was right there, neatly typed, witnessed, notarized. I'd signed it after my surgery last year, when the doctors thought my heart might not handle the anesthesia. It was supposed to be temporary. "Just in case," they said. I never revoked it. Mark sighed when I told him. That gives him access. He can propose revisions, freeze accounts, even initiate transfers if he argues best interest of the family. But not without your signature. That's the line in the sand. I hung up and stared at my hands. The skin was thinner now, veins showing through like blue wires. These were the same hands that had built every inch of the home we lived in. The pergola out back, the oak staircase, even the birdhouse by the lake. Now those same hands had signed away the key that let him try to erase me. The next few days blurred. Emily sent polite texts about reconciliation and cooling off. My son didn't call. I spent hours sitting in my study, reading through the trust again, this time as if it belonged to a stranger. His name was listed first, my daughter second. Mine, not at all. Wednesday morning, I walked into the kitchen and found a delivery envelope slipped under the door. It was from his law firm. Trust adjustment proposal, signature required. Inside, a cover letter with language that could make a saint curse. Dear Mr. Whitmore, following our client's instructions, we've updated the beneficiary structure to reflect current family realities. Current family realities. The sentence made my stomach twist. I didn't sign. I didn't even read the rest. I folded the document once and slid it into my wife's recipe book, the one place he'd never think to look. That night, I opened the safe deposit box key I kept taped under my desk. Inside the box at Naples First Bank was the original trust, the one I'd signed in 2010. And unlike the draft on his desk, that version held my signature, my wife's initials, and the old, unshakable clause that said, "Any attempted revision without the settler's consent shall render the successor's claim void." Void. Such a beautiful word, when used correctly. I made a copy, slipped it into a new folder, and labeled it Evidence, in case. As I turned off the lamp that night, I thought of something my wife once told me. Never raise your voice at someone who's already decided you don't matter. Show them the math instead. I didn't know what the equation was yet, but I knew I was about to solve it. By Thursday, something inside me had settled. Not calm, something colder. I'd stopped pacing the house and started taking notes. When you've been erased from your own family, the only way back is through paper. At 8:01 a.m., I called Mark Redfield again. "Mark," I said, "if he's rewriting the trust, I'm rewriting the ending." He chuckled softly. "You mean a counter-revision?" "I mean insurance," I replied. We met that afternoon in his downtown office on Tamiami Trail, an old Spanish-style building that still smelled of lemon polish and old law books. I spread the draft copy across his desk. The missing beneficiary line looked almost clean, as if I'd never existed. Mark leaned forward. "Tom, you built this estate. You can redirect it wherever you like, but we have to do it quietly, while he still believes he's holding the strings." That was exactly what I wanted. We began mapping what he called the shadow plan, a separate, irrevocable trust to be filed under a different entity name. The Whitmore Legacy Fund would look charitable on paper, supporting community housing and architectural scholarships, but the control would remain with me and my chosen trustees. Every cent my son thought he'd secured would migrate there piece by piece. Step 1. Freeze discretionary accounts under Clause 14B of the original trust. A protection I'd forgotten existed. Step 2. Move $1.2 million in liquid assets into a holding company Mark's firm managed for estate transitions. Step 3. Record every unauthorized communication from my son or his attorney. "You sure you want to play it slow?" Mark asked. "I want him confident," I said. Confidence leaves fingerprints. The next morning, I drove to my bank. The branch manager, a young woman named Dina, remembered me from the loan days. I told her I needed detailed activity logs for the last 60 days. She hesitated until I produced my identification and a notarized letter from Mark. When the printer hummed to life, my pulse did too. 2 pages later, there it was, a $48,500 wire transfer initiated by my son's POA credentials, labeled family maintenance expense. He'd paid himself a salary from my retirement. I slid the printouts into a folder titled Evidence, not anger, just documentation. At home, I opened the safe and laid everything out. Original 2010 trust, unauthorized draft, bank transfers, power of attorney copy, a new yellow notebook. On the first page, I wrote, December 1st, Phase 1 begins. I called my daughter Claire that night, the only one who hadn't sided with him. She lives in Austin and teaches art history. "Dad, you sound tired," she said. "Just making sure the family story has the right ending," I told her. I didn't mention the missing name. Not yet. Friday evening brought a surprise. A courier delivered an envelope from my son's firm. No return address, just his initials stamped on the flap. Inside was a letter that began, "In light of recent discussions, please refrain from independent financial decisions until we finalize revisions. Refrain." As if I were an employee. He'd forgotten whose signature built his career. I drafted my own letter that night. Short, precise, legal. All decisions pertaining to the Whitmore Trust shall remain under the original settler's discretion until superseded by court order. Any interference will be documented and prosecuted under Florida Statute 825.103, financial exploitation of an elder. Mark reviewed it the next morning, stamped it, and mailed copies to both attorneys. Then came the subtle part. I invited my son to a family planning review 2 weeks later, December 15th. I told him I'd bring Mark so we could finalize the revisions. He replied within 10 minutes. Good. About time. He didn't know the room would hold more than lawyers. It would hold proof. Over the next days, I gathered my quiet allies, Dina from the bank, Mark from the firm, and Claire on standby for a video call. Each would have a copy of the real trust, each time-stamped and notarized. By December 10th, every dollar had a new destination. The Whitmore Legacy Fund existed legally, waiting in a sealed envelope at the clerk's office. That night, I sat alone in the sunroom where this began. The orchids had started to wilt, their petals falling one by one onto the table. I touched a petal, thin as paper, and thought, let him believe it's all still his. The hardest part of revenge is patience. But patience, properly invested, pays compound interest. Revenge wasn't rage anymore. It was rhythm. Each day had a checklist, every move filed like an architectural blueprint. The old instincts from my design years came back. The quiet patience, the precision, the satisfaction of knowing that one misplaced line can make an entire structure collapse. December 11th started like any other Monday, but it was the first day I began to build his downfall. At 8:30 a.m., I visited the county clerk's office. The same marble hallway where I'd once filed construction permits now echoed under my shoes. I handed the clerk 2 envelopes. One contained the notarized founding papers for the Whitmore Legacy Fund, the trust that would absorb the family estate. The other contained an affidavit outlining my son's unauthorized financial activities, complete with bank printouts and POA records. The clerk stamped both without comment. Each thud of that red ink was a nail in his plan's coffin. By noon, I was at Naples First Bank again, meeting with Dina. I slid her a copy of the affidavit. She scanned it quickly, then looked up. "Mr. Whitmore, this means we'll have to freeze any account linked to his authority." "That's the idea," I said. She nodded. "We'll flag all activity. Anything he tries to move. I'll see it before it clears." I thanked her and left a handwritten note she didn't expect. "People like you make the system worth trusting." The rest of the day went to Harold's office. He reviewed the new trust structure with a grin. "Everything clean," he said, tapping the signature line. "He'll find out the way people like him always do. Too late to stop it." "Let's make sure he finds out loud," I replied. The family review meeting was set for Friday, December 15th, 2 p.m. at Redfield & Barnes LLP. My son thought it was a signing. I intended it to be a reading. On Tuesday, I made subtle moves to sell the illusion. I called him mid-morning. "Son, I've been thinking. You're right. It's time to modernize the estate," I said, keeping my tone steady. He exhaled like a man who'd finally won. "Glad you see it, Dad. It'll be smoother this way." "No drama. No drama," I agreed. "Friday, then. We'll finalize everything." He didn't hear the faint rustle of paper as I underlined the word finalize on my calendar. That night, I organized what Mark called the reveal kit. Inside, certified copy of the 2010 trust, certified copy of the 2023 revision draft, his bank transfer proof, the new irrevocable trust for the Whitmore Legacy Fund, a summary sheet in plain English. All previous claims nullified by settlers' authority. Every document had a witness line. Every witness was waiting. On Wednesday, I tested the recorder, a small silver device no larger than a pen, placed neatly inside my coat pocket. I wanted a record of his voice when realization hit, when arrogance turned into panic. That moment would be the true inheritance. By Thursday evening, I drove to the lake house, the same place where he learned to swim, where we once caught bluegill at dawn. I stood on the dock, breathing the cold air. For years, I'd believed peace came from giving. Now I understood. It also comes from reclaiming. Inside the cabin safe, I found the deed. Whitmore Lakefront Property. Estimated value, $1.4 million. I slid it into the Legacy Fund folder. My son thought this house would go to him. He'd even told a neighbor he planned to renovate it once Dad's ready to downsize. I smiled at that. He'd be downsizing too, just not the way he imagined. Friday morning came clear and sharp, sunlight cutting through the blinds. I put on my charcoal suit, polished shoes, and my wife's old wedding band still on my finger. Revenge didn't need fury. It just needed formality. At 1:50 p.m., I walked into Redfield & Barnes with the folder under my arm. Mark was already inside, calm as a man about to start a symphony. 2 witnesses from the firm stood ready, one from banking, one from the notary's office. At precisely 2 p.m., my son and Emily arrived, confident, rehearsed, carrying that same manila folder they'd shown me weeks ago. He smiled like a host. "You ready to sign, Dad?" I placed my folder on the table and said, "I already did." He frowned, confused, until I added, "Today, you'll be signing something else, an acknowledgement." He didn't know it yet, but every chair, every document, every witness in that room existed for one purpose: to turn his arrogance into evidence. The meeting hadn't even begun, and he'd already lost. He walked into that conference room like a man stepping onto his own stage. Dark navy suit. Pocket square. That polished smirk lawyers wear when they think the ending's already written. Emily followed a step behind, clutching her phone, eyes darting between me and the folder I carried. The air conditioning hummed low, steady. The only sound until Mark shut the door behind them. The click of the latch was surgical. I took the seat at the head of the table, the same spot I used to occupy at family dinners before he decided I'd earned the wrong chair. He placed his folder in front of me with ceremony, sliding a pen across like an offering. "Let's make this official," he said. "We've all waited long enough." I didn't touch the pen. Mark, calm as ever, lifted his glasses. "Before we sign anything, we'll review the documents for accuracy." "That's not necessary," my son said, a little too quickly. "These are final. I drafted them myself." I leaned back, folded my hands, and studied him. He looked so sure, so composed, but his voice had that tremor only arrogance disguises. "You drafted them yourself?" I asked softly. He nodded. Someone had to take responsibility. "You weren't doing it." He didn't notice the way Mark's brow arched or how the two witnesses, the notary and Dina from the bank, were already flipping through copies of their own. Every paper in this room had a twin. Every twin had a timestamp. Mark opened the first page and read aloud, his voice deliberate, smooth. "This document hereby supersedes the original Whitmore Family Holdings Trust of 2010, transferring all decision-making authority to the undersigned successor, David Whitmore, effective upon the signature of Thomas Whitmore." He paused. "Is that your wording, David?" My son smirked. "Yes, clean and efficient." Mark adjusted his glasses. "It's also invalid." The room stopped breathing. "What?" Mark flipped to the second page. "You can't supersede an irrevocable clause without the settler's active consent. And since Mr. Whitmore here never signed any such consent, your entire draft collapses under statute." My son's jaw tightened. "We have power of attorney." I opened my own folder. "Had," I said quietly. "It was revoked last month." Mark nodded toward Dina, who slid a paper across the table, a notarized revocation form dated November 12th, countersigned by the county clerk. "This was filed before your first revision meeting," she said. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Her fingers gripped the edge of her phone like a lifeline. My son's composure cracked just slightly. "You can't—" "Actually, he can," Mark interrupted. "Florida law allows immediate termination upon notice of misuse." "And misuse," he said, tapping the next page, "is what this is." I let him sweat through the silence. When he finally spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave. "Dad, this isn't about greed. It's about efficiency. You're 76. Someone has to manage things." "Someone," I repeated. Interesting word. Usually used by people who mean themselves. I pulled out the second folder, the one marked Whitmore Legacy Fund. I didn't hand it over. I just opened it. The top document bore the new seal. Registered Irrevocable Trust, Whitmore Legacy Fund. Filed December 11th. He stared at it, uncomprehending. "What is that?" "That," I said, "is what happens when a father listens instead of yells." Mark slid a copy of the filing receipt across to him. "The assets you're attempting to control were already transferred into this fund 4 days ago. Legally, they're no longer part of the family estate." The pen my son had brought began to roll slowly across the table, bumping against the folder's edge. Emily whispered, "David, what does that mean?" "It means," Mark said before he could answer, that he just discovered his father is still very much the architect of this family. The color drained from my son's face. He sank back in his chair, staring at the papers like they'd turned to dust. "Dad," he said finally, voice barely audible. "You didn't have to go this far." I looked him in the eye. "You told me I didn't deserve this family. I decided to believe you." He said nothing after that, just stared at the folder, lost in the math of what he'd done. Mark stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Mr. Whitmore, I think we're done here." The witnesses signed their statements, gathered their copies, and left quietly. When the door closed, my son remained seated, staring at the words Whitmore Legacy Fund, like a man reading his own obituary. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood, straightened my jacket, and said, "You always wanted to handle the family assets. Congratulations, you just learned how not to." Then I walked out, leaving him with the silence he'd earned. 2 days after the meeting, the storm began to circle back. You can always tell when a secret finally lands. The phone starts ringing in threes. First, my daughter Claire called from Austin. "Dad, what did you do?" she asked, half laughing, half scared. "David's been calling everyone. He says you rewrote the family trust." "I didn't rewrite it," I said. "I corrected it." By the time the second call came, from my son's lawyer, the headlines in our small corner of Florida already had the story. Local architect restructures family trust after alleged mismanagement. The article quoted anonymous sources. Anyone who'd been at that meeting knew exactly who the sources were. Then came the third ring. My son's number again. I let it go to voicemail. He left one line. "We're doing a family dinner. You should be there." It sounded like a trap, but it was the trap I'd built for him. Friday night, December 22nd. The restaurant he'd chosen glowed with polished glass and soft piano music. His kind of battlefield. The table was long and sleek, flanked by Emily, my grandchildren, and 2 unfamiliar faces. Their financial advisor and a man from his firm. Every move screamed image control. I arrived on time, alone, carrying a small leather folder. Same one as before. The hostess led me past the holiday garlands to the center table. My son rose halfway, pretending to smile. "Dad, glad you came." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. We ordered, though no one touched the bread. Emily fussed with the wine. The children whispered to each other. The advisor cleared his throat and began, "Mr. Whitmore, David's only concern is family harmony. There's been confusion about asset distribution." I stopped him with a raised hand. "Confusion ends tonight." I opened the folder. Inside was a simple white envelope, sealed with the foundation's crest. Whitmore Legacy Fund. I placed it between the candles. "This," I said, "is the final ledger." David's eyes flicked to the envelope. "You came here to humiliate me?" I shook my head. "To clarify ownership." The piano paused mid-song, as if the room itself wanted to hear. I pulled out a single page and began reading aloud, my voice steady. Effective immediately. All holdings previously under the Whitmore Family Trust have been transferred to the Whitmore Legacy Fund, a registered charitable entity overseen by independent trustees. Beneficiaries, the community, scholarships for architectural students, and 1 educational grant in the name of Margaret Whitmore. Emily exhaled sharply. "You mean none of it goes to the family?" "Not this family," I said. "But it will build others." My son's face went pale. "You can't do that." "You can't just erase." I slid a second page across the table. It was the notarized revocation of his power of attorney, dated and witnessed. "I didn't erase you," I said. "You did that when you used my name for your salary." The advisor leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, maybe we can find a compromise." "There isn't one," I said. "The foundation is sealed, irrevocable, and publicly filed. The money's already working." He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the tile. You think this is noble? You think Mom would have wanted this? I looked him squarely in the eyes. Your mother believed in earned inheritance, not entitlement. She'd be ashamed of what you tried to do. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed, short, bitter. So that's it? You destroy the family to make a point? No, I said quietly. I saved it from becoming yours. The silence that followed had weight. The waiter hovered, unsure if we were a family or a scene from a trial. My grandchildren sat frozen, too young to understand the paperwork, but old enough to sense the truth. I gathered the pages and placed them back in the envelope. You wanted transparency, I said. Now you have it. Everything's on record. Then, before standing, I added, the foundation has one open seat for a volunteer liaison. No salary, no control, just work. If you ever decide you remember what the family name means, the door's open. He didn't answer. Emily stared at her plate. I left cash for the bill, old habit, and walked out through the corridor lined with mirrors. My reflection followed me, steady and straight. No longer the man who'd been told he didn't deserve his family. Outside, the night air was cool, the Gulf wind pushing faint music from the open windows. I stood under a street lamp and took one last look through the glass. He was still at the table, staring down at the envelope, his hand covering his mouth like he was trying to hold something in. Anger, regret, maybe both. That was the last time we were in the same room. The next morning, a local reporter called asking for a quote. I told her the truth in one sentence. Sometimes the only way to protect a family is to take it out of their hands. The article ran 2 days later. Father turns fortune into legacy after son's betrayal. I didn't need applause. I just needed the silence that came after. A silence that sounded a lot like peace. I thought the storm had passed after that dinner. But storms don't end when the sky clears. They end when the echo dies. And my son's echo followed me everywhere. By New Year's Eve, the fallout had already rippled through Naples like a quiet scandal. The business community read the headlines, neighbors whispered behind fences, and my daughter Claire called almost daily to check on me. You okay, Dad? She'd ask. David's angry. I mean, really angry. I'm fine, I said every time. He's not angry at me. He's angry at gravity. See, when a man builds his world on someone else's foundation, he forgets gravity applies to him too. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from his attorney. No apology, just legal posturing. Our client reserves the right to contest the validity of the recent transfer. Mark read it, then smiled the way an old lawyer smiles when he knows the other side is bluffing. They're flailing, he said. He'd have to prove coercion, and we've got more paper than a forest. Let him try, I said. I want him to read every word he ignored, and try he did. His firm filed a notice of review, claiming I'd acted under emotional duress. The hearing never made it to court. The judge dismissed it in chambers after one look at the record. Video call confirmations, bank timestamps, the notarized revocation of power of attorney. My son's signature appeared on 3 of the very forms he'd forgotten existed. The case file closed in less than 15 minutes. But the real consequences didn't come from courtrooms. They came from people. Clients began pulling away from his firm, whispering that if he'd manipulate his own father, what might he do with their portfolios? Emily resigned from her position at a local nonprofit after a board member forwarded her the article. Their social circle, country club types who thrive on perception, went quiet. He called once after that. It was late evening, mid-January. I almost didn't answer. But old habits die slower than pride. Dad, he said, voice raw and uneven. You didn't just take the money. You took everything. No, I said calmly. I gave it purpose. He didn't argue. Just exhaled like a man sinking underwater. I never thought you'd actually do it. That's why it worked. Silence. Then the line clicked, dead. I sat there for a long time after, watching the ceiling fan spin shadows across the wall. Regret isn't something you celebrate, but sometimes it's the cleanest ending you can get. Claire visited the following weekend. She walked through the front door holding a bag of groceries and a smile that didn't quite hide her sadness. "You really did it, huh?" she said. "I did." She poured coffee and sat across from me. "He's humiliated. He won't talk to me." "He will," I said. "Eventually. Pride's loud. Forgiveness is quiet. He just hasn't heard it yet." We ate dinner together that night, simple and quiet. I noticed how peaceful the house felt. No raised voices, no tension humming under the air like static. Just the sound of forks, conversation, and the ocean breeze brushing against the windows. The next morning, I found a letter slipped under my door. My son's handwriting. Still careful, still exact. The envelope was thick, folded around a single page. "Dad, I thought money made me smart. Turns out it just made me loud. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope Mom would have been proud of what you did, even if I wasn't." I read it twice. Then I set it beside the framed photo of my wife and me on our wedding day. The corners of her smile seemed to agree. Mark called that afternoon with an update. The Whitmore Legacy Fund had already begun issuing its first scholarships. 2 students from Florida Gulf Coast University, both studying architecture, both unable to afford tuition. "They sent thank you letters," he said. "Do you want to read them?" I told him no. I didn't need to. The idea of those kids sketching their first blueprints was enough. Later that night, I walked outside to the porch. The air smelled like salt and pine. The stars were so clear they looked close enough to touch. I thought about the trust, about how something built from betrayal could end up building hope instead. You can lose a son to greed, but sometimes, if you're lucky, you gain a lesson from it that outlives you both. That night, I slept for the first time without hearing his voice in my head. Justice doesn't always come stamped by a judge or written in a headline. Sometimes it arrives in small envelopes, quiet, unannounced, and unmistakable. It was early February when the first one came. A handwritten note from a name I didn't recognize. "Mr. Whitmore, my mother lives at the River House community you funded. She told me you saved her dignity. I just wanted to say, thank you." I sat at the kitchen table, the morning light pooling across the paper. It was the same table where my son had once told me I didn't deserve this family. Now it felt like the universe had mailed me the opposite message, postmarked with grace. That week, the foundation officially launched its first scholarship cycle. 5 awards for architectural students, all under the Whitmore Legacy Fund. Mark handled the logistics, but he made sure to invite me to the boardroom on the day they signed the first checks. He said it was only right that the man who turned loss into legacy should witness the beginning. The ceremony was small, quiet. 5 students, 2 professors, a local reporter, and the plaque I'd brought from home. "In memory of Margaret Whitmore," it read, "who believed good design could make a person feel seen." As I handed out the envelopes, I saw the faces of each student, nervous, grateful, full of possibility. One of them, a young woman named Naomi, said softly, "Sir, my father stopped talking to me when I switched majors to architecture. He thought it wasn't practical. But this scholarship means I can finish what I started." Her words hit deeper than she could know. I smiled and told her, practical doesn't always mean right. That night, when I got home, I found another envelope in the mail. This one from my son. He hadn't written since his last letter. The handwriting was different, smaller, careful, like he was afraid the paper might judge him. "Dad, I saw the news about the scholarships. You turned everything I destroyed into something good. I'm not ready to face you, but I'm proud of you. I hope someday you'll let me help. Not for money, just to feel like your son again." I read it 3 times. The last line blurred before I could finish it. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the photo of my wife on the mantel. her smile frozen in that eternal understanding she always had. Justice, I realized, wasn't about watching him fall. It was about making sure I didn't. 2 days later, I wrote him back. Short, like him. Son, the door was never locked. But you'll have to walk through it differently this time. I didn't send it right away. I left it on the counter, weighed down by my coffee mug, and let it sit there for a week. Sometimes even forgiveness needs to think. Meanwhile, the foundation kept growing. Harold, ever the steady hand, reported that donations had surpassed 1 million in matching contributions. The city council invited me to a small ceremony in March to honor the transformational gift to senior care and education. When I walked into the council chamber, applause broke out. I wasn't used to that sound anymore. The mayor shook my hand and said, "You didn't just build a fund, Mr. Whitmore. You built an idea." I smiled. "Ideas last longer than wills," I told him. The local paper ran another piece the next morning. From betrayal to blueprint. How a father rebuilt his legacy. I didn't keep the clipping. I didn't need to. The story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the people it helped. Later that week, I visited the River House community again. The sun was low, gold bleeding into the horizon. A few residents sat on the porch, playing cards, laughing about nothing. One of them waved and said, "Mr. Whitmore." "You did good, sir," I nodded, unable to speak. "I'd built houses all my life. But this was the first one that truly felt like home." As I drove back, I passed the sign at the entrance. Built from betrayal, dedicated to dignity. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was restoration. And in that, I found justice. Mornings feel different now. Quieter. I still wake at 6, pour 1 cup of black coffee, and sit by the window that overlooks the garden. The same magnolia tree that shaded my children when they were small still stands there. Older, scarred, but growing anyway. That tree reminds me that survival doesn't always look beautiful. Sometimes it's just the stubborn act of staying rooted. I've started keeping a small leather journal. Each morning I write 1 sentence, never more. A habit Margaret started when she was sick. "If you can't make the day longer," she'd said, "at least make it honest." Yesterday's line reads, "Justice ages better than anger." I think about that a lot. The house feels lighter these days. Claire visits on weekends, usually with a bottle of red wine and too many stories about her students. We sit on the porch and watch the sun slide into the Gulf. Sometimes she asks if I've heard from David. I always tell her the truth. Not yet. But I think he's listening. In a way, he has to be. Every headline, every scholarship, every plaque carries our name. The Whitmore Legacy Fund has grown larger than I ever imagined. Last week, Harold told me it's now supporting senior housing projects across the state. "You turned betrayal into infrastructure," he said. I laughed. "I was an architect, Harold. Building is the only way I know how to heal." And he was right. The work healed me, brick by brick, signature by signature. It rebuilt something that no apology could have. Sometimes I walk through the study and glance at the framed documents on the wall. Not the trust papers, I keep those locked away, but the first scholarship certificate, the River House dedication, the newspaper clipping from the council ceremony. Proof that something good grew out of something cruel. I don't hate my son anymore. I stopped carrying that weight when I realized revenge and justice were never the same thing. Revenge feeds the wound, justice closes it. The last time I heard from him was a text. "I'm volunteering at one of your housing sites." Didn't use the family name. "Thought you'd want to know." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some things don't need words to count as forgiveness. Now, when the evenings come, I sit under the magnolia tree with a small lantern, same one Margaret used to light during hurricanes. I open the journal and write another line. "You can't erase blood, but you can redraw the lines it runs through. The wind carries the scent of salt water and garden soil. I close my eyes and listen to the faint sound of waves and distant laughter. Families walking the beach, children shouting against the wind. Once, that sound used to hurt. Now it just reminds me that life keeps moving, even after it's been divided and rewritten. The family I lost gave me a cause. The cause gave me peace. And in the end, peace was the one inheritance I hadn't planned for. The one I truly deserved. Spring came early to Naples that year. The air carried that soft ocean sweetness again, the kind that used to mean family barbecues and late-night laughter. But the house was quieter now. Not empty, just different, like it had exhaled after years of holding its breath. By March, the Whitmore Legacy Fund had become its own living thing. Harold called it the child that doesn't argue. Donations kept coming. Small checks from retirees, handwritten notes from former clients, even one from a construction firm that owed me nothing but respect. Each one arrived with a story. One man wrote, "My father lost everything because we couldn't afford his care. You reminded me that decency can be designed." I pinned that one above my desk. Claire handled most of the digital side, setting up newsletters, managing applications. She'd stop by on Sundays with her laptop and a cup of caramel coffee, always teasing me for still printing every document. "Dad, you're single-handedly keeping the paper industry alive." I'd grin. "Good. Someone has to keep the world tangible." Some evenings, I'd drive down to the River House, the senior community that started it all. The residents had planted flowers in the front garden, lilies and rosemary, their idea of honoring Margaret. They called it the Architect's Garden. Every time I walked past the plaque, I'd catch someone touching it for luck, not because of the name, but because they felt it stood for something unbreakable. A local journalist reached out in April for a follow-up interview. I almost declined, but she said something that stopped me. "Mr. Whitmore, people don't see many stories where someone rebuilds instead of destroys." So I met her at the house, in the same sunroom where this story began. The orchids bloomed again that week, white, strong, defiant. She asked me if I'd ever regretted cutting my son out. I told her the truth. No, because I didn't cut him out. I just stopped writing him into things he never read. She nodded and turned off the recorder. That's going to stay with people. The article went viral locally. The architect who redrew his family blueprint. For a few days, strangers waved to me at grocery stores. One woman stopped me near the parking lot and said, "My daughter and I listened to your story together. It helped us talk for the first time in months." That was the moment I realized the story wasn't about revenge anymore. It had become instruction. Justice had done its work quietly. My son hadn't reached out again, but Claire told me he'd started volunteering full-time with a housing nonprofit. I checked their website one night. There he was, sleeves rolled up, helping a team rebuild hurricane-damaged homes. No titles, no suits, no spotlight. Just work. I didn't call him. Didn't need to. Seeing him there was enough. Some nights I still sit in the study under the framed Maple Grove brochure, the one from the other story, the one I keep as a reminder. It's funny how life repeats lessons until you finally listen. Now, instead of anger, I feel gratitude. Betrayal turned out to be a strange kind of teacher. It stripped me of illusion and handed me truth in exchange. The house feels warm again. The light falls differently through the glass, landing on old photos and newer ones. Claire at the foundation's office, students at their first builds, seniors smiling in the garden. When people ask how I survived it all, I give them the same answer. I stopped trying to win the argument and started building the answer, and that, in its own quiet way, became the perfect ending. It's strange how life circles back to where it started. Just quieter, wiser, and less afraid. One afternoon in May, I received a formal invitation in the mail. Embossed envelope. Gold lettering. Whitmore and Associates, Community Partnership Gala. My son's firm had rebranded after the scandal. Beneath the logo was a small note in his handwriting. Dad, I'd like you to see what I'm building now. I almost didn't go, but Margaret would have told me to. She always believed grace wasn't weakness. It was symmetry. The event was at a hotel downtown, polished and grand. When I walked in, my son was standing at the entrance. No tie, no entourage. Just him. He looked older, not by years, but by humility. He smiled. The real kind, not the courtroom kind. Glad you came, he said. I wasn't sure I would, I replied. I wasn't sure you should, he admitted. And we both laughed, quiet and uneasy. Inside, a banner caught my eye. In collaboration with the Whitmore Legacy Fund. He'd partnered his new firm with the foundation, donating design work for senior housing projects. On the projector screen, my name appeared under Founding Advisor Emeritus. He glanced at me. I figured if I couldn't inherit it, I could at least help it grow. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see arrogance in his eyes. I saw understanding, the kind that only loss can teach. The evening ended with a small speech. He took the podium and said, I used to think legacy was about possession. My father showed me it's about contribution. The room applauded, but I stayed still, watching him. There it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. Not his regret, his learning. Afterward, he walked me to the door. You were right, Dad, he said. You built this family on paper and principle. I just didn't read the fine print. I smiled. That's why I wrote it twice. We shook hands. Not father and son, but two men who'd finally found the same page. When I got home, I poured a small drink and sat in my study under the framed line I'd written months earlier. Justice ages better than anger. I added one more beneath it, the final line of the story I'd been living. He told me I didn't deserve this family. Turns out, I was the only one who kept it standing. Then I turned off the lamp, leaving the plaque's golden reflection glowing softly in the dark. Proof that legacy, when built right, can outlive bitterness and still shine.